Hey friends, one of the things our team gets asked every time we're at a speaking engagement or event is, where can I get that sweatshirt? Everyone wants to know where to get our simple sweatshirts emblazoned with the words, "Nothing is wasted," that we wear as we're sharing about our ministry or connecting people to our resources or hearing people's pain to purpose journey. We know that there is nothing inherently special about this simple phrase on a sweatshirt. The reason we've been drawn to it and you've been drawn to it is because nothing is wasted is not just some Christian cliche phrase or pithy platitude that you throw around, but it's a deep longing of your soul as you encounter trauma and tragedy, loss and pain. We all need the reminder that our pain won't be wasted, that in God's upside down kingdom, He will take all the hurt and suffering we've encountered and use it somehow. For His glory, yes, but also for our good and for the good of the world around us. That's why you love our simple "Nothing is Wasted" sweatshirt, which, by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, I've got it on right now. And that is why we are so excited to announce the official launch of the "Nothing is Wasted" sweatshirt. That's right, they are in the store as of in a couple of days, because right now you can pre-order the sweatshirt. It's the perfect gift for a friend or yourself that will serve as a reminder to everyone who sees it. And you can pre-order yours now by going to nothingiswasted.com/sweatshirt before they actually release. Now there's two different colors. There's a black one like I'm wearing right now, and there is a, I didn't know the color of this other one. I thought maybe it was like a cream or a beige or something like that. My wife informed me that it's called sand. Sand is the color, but two different colors. I promise you, you're going to love these sweatshirts, and we can't wait for you to get your Nothing is Wasted sweatshirt and share this message of hope with everyone that you encounter. This will be a perfect gift for somebody or a conversation starter as you go about your day, in your community, at the coffee shop, at work, or in my case, a lot of times at the airport or on a plane or in an Uber. It is an amazing way to begin talking about how God has shown up in your life and that with Him, nothing is wasted. So go pick up your sweatshirt now. Pre-order it, nothingiswasted.com/sweatshirt. We have a limited supply, so you're going to want to jump on this quickly.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I'm your host for today's episode, Aubrey Sampson. And as always, we have another incredible conversation with you. I'm joined by Dr. Lina AbuJamra. And this woman is a powerhouse. Not only is she a doctor, she's a pediatric emergency room doctor. She has a ministry called Living with Power, and this is an anointed woman. For over 20 years, she's been teaching the Bible. She's been speaking at conferences, retreats, colleges here in the States, overseas as well. She's the author of several books, including her most recent one. I love this title, "Don't Tell Anyone You're Reading This: A Christian Doctor's Thoughts on Sex, Shame, and Other Troublesome Issues." She has a Bible study series called Mapping the Footsteps of God. And look, she has church hurt. She has church pain. I know a lot of you who listen to the Nothing is Wasted podcast are no stranger to that. She knows pain. She knows brokenness, but she has made it her mission to ignite passion for Jesus in the hearts of God's people. And you'll hear it, like she is contagious. As we talk, you'll hear her excitement and her passion. And I think you'll probably sense your heart starting to race as well. The interesting thing about Lina is through her ministry, Living with Power, she provides medical and humanitarian aid to Lebanese people, to refugee communities in Lebanon, and to Ukrainian families that have been displaced by war. She was born in Beirut, Lebanon, and she calls Chicago home. So she's like a Chicago gal, just like me. She is single. She is a huge Green Bay Packers fan. And one of the things that we talk about is her latest project. It's called Unshakable Moxie, Growing a Resilient Faith. And it features some other folks that we've had on the podcast, Tony Collier, Ruth Cho Simmons, and more. And so you're going to love our conversation. You're going to love Lina. And I think, one of the things, without giving too much away, one of the things that meant a lot to me was just, again, her passion in the midst of a really hard season. Like, this is a woman who has I like to call it a fighter's praise faith. That's like a faith with gravitas, because she has been through a lot and yet still is choosing faith in Jesus. She's a woman worth listening to. So I know you're going to love our conversation. Let's go ahead and take a listen to my chat with Dr. Lina AbuJamra. Well, my friend Lina, thank you for being here on the Nothing is Wasted podcast today. I'm so glad to have this conversation with you.
Well, listen, I am really looking forward to this conversation. Sometimes some of the best conversations happen after some strain, and we've had some technical things even here. So I'm excited to be here. I trust God has something planned for us.
That's what I was just thinking. God has something for our listeners to hear and for us to hear. And so I am so excited. All right. Lina, for our listeners who may not know you, I mean, your story is wild. You're a doctor. You've got this global ministry. You also have a story of church pain that you've been writing about. So big picture, let's just talk about who are you? What do you do? All of those fun things.
Right. I'm a doctor, I actually trained in pediatric ER, practiced for about 15 years. But now I do telehealth, and some of the transition happened because of the ministry. But basically, when I was doing my fellowship, I felt called to teach the Bible. I started teaching a Sunday school class, fell in love with teaching God's word, and the Lord, I felt, called me to vocational ministry. And he's confirmed that now 25 years later, maybe. Awesome. And it's been good. So I started living with Power Ministries somewhere in late 2000, maybe 10-ish, 9, 10. And I was at that point blogging, doing what people in that era did, and eventually started writing books. In that course of that time in my life, I was the women's ministry director while I was practicing medicine at a big mega church in Chicago. And, and here we are, 20 years later, juggling all these things. And then since that church time too, we started doing work with, so our main ministry started with like discipleship, resources, Bible teaching, writing about God. And now we do also, which I believe is part of discipleship, is the outreach part, which is global work with specifically Syrian refugees, the Lebanese people. And then we started helping the Ukrainians back a couple of years ago when the war started. So,
amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, I do want to circle back to that because I would just really love to hear about your ministry with refugees and then some of the displaced Ukrainian people. Before we get there, though, Lina, and I do want to hear more about Living with Power as well. We could dive into your church hurt story. I'm a Chicago gal as well, so I know there's been a lot of pain at some of the mega churches here. Just what was that journey for you?
Well, by the time I started going to the church that I eventually left, that I feel was a big part of my church hurt story, I was well into, I was a mature Christian, and I was, wasn't naive. I'd grown up in a Christian home and spent a lot of time in church. So I feel like by the time I landed in the church, I was a pretty good judge of what's a godly church, and there was for a few years. It was actually on fire. I think everyone would have acknowledged that. And really an amazing movement of the Spirit was happening in the first few years I was there. And I felt like a lot of my own personal dreams in terms of my life. I'm single. I never married. I was engaged twice, which was sort of part of my ministry story and some pain there in my life. But that was sort of how my life in ministry started, came out of that, time of season of pain with the broken engagement and loss of a relationship that I thought would be forever. And so the Lord had already sort of shown me that indeed nothing is wasted in a sense. So I thought I'd learned that lesson, and that,
I've got it. I've nailed it.
I disappointment, like my first big crisis with God. I felt like, okay, I was taken by surprise. I thought people who obey God were spared those pains, but I wasn't. So I didn't sort of foresee coming to the church. And at that point, I think because I had processed a lot of this stuff with my dating world and my engagements that were broken, I felt like, I don't know. I just thought, like, what could hurt more? But all my goal and all my focus in life was the Lord and his ministry. And part of that story was very heavily tied to the local church. And so being a woman, and I grew up in a complementarian, meaning, I believe men ought to be pastors. That was my background. And I still by and large believe that, but, with some freedom, obviously I speak to men now, but not in the context of pastoring, but besides that, so for someone like me with that background, it felt like I was in a perfect church now. God had opened the door to a church that was vibrant, on fire, and where my giftedness was going to explode. And in fact, after a couple of years of going there, the Lord allowed me to be the women's director. I had a very close relationship with the pastor. I was really on the inner circle of what was mushrooming as a very, very prominent church in the Chicago area. So it felt very anointed and very divine. And really sort of a coming together of all the pain in my life, all of this concept of nothing is wasted. It was like now I could see why God had allowed all this stuff, because here we were living the dream. So and I think this is an important part of this, the pain, because I think because of that, what ended up happening was more painful. So it wasn't like, you just are members. I think back in the 80s, we left a church, after we went to college. My parents ended up leaving the Baptist church they were in. That didn't hit as hard because it was like people had church hurt back then. But the difference, I think, for what's happened in the last decade in the United States is that there is a high level of vestedness. The pain that is now happening in the church isn't like, it's so, I think people like, so much of my identity and my life was so connected to the church, so that by the time things started falling apart, and it was there, and again, remember, this is 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I left 10 years ago. And so the language that we now have for church hurt, church abuse was not there.
Totally. It was not there.
So it made it harder to understand what was happening. There were no resources on this. It was just like you could see something was off. And the stories that you would hear, like an elder would leave, you would hear something and you couldn't tell who was right, who was wrong. And you're battling sort of this desire to be in the right place, but also this inner sense of there's something off here. And so I'm wrestling through this, and now I'm finally like writing, like Moody Books asked me to write a book. So it felt on one hand like my own life was coming to a good place in the ministry. There were some normal strains of trying to fit in, as a woman in the church and all this stuff. But also on the other hand, like also sort of seeing these cracks in the foundation. But the more you question the cracks, the more, and now we use the term gaslighting. But at the time, like it was just like you thought, well, maybe I'm not right with God. Maybe I need to repent. Yes, I'm being critical. I'm being complaining. I'm pointing at leaders. I'm not submitting to leadership. And so you live with that for a while. So what happens in that season, even leading up to you leaving a church, because there's a point that I left where it was like the writing was on the wall. Like when people ask me, do you have any regrets about leaving that system? And I think if I had a regret, I wish I left 6 months or a year earlier. I think I saw the signs, but I didn't want to believe it. And so, and in hindsight, I was right. Like the Spirit was showing me. I just was afraid to leave the system. And so by the time you end up leaving, though, what you don't see, again, you don't foresee because you've not lived it. You haven't read stories of people who have left. So you sort of are now, you leave and you're like, all your friends are gone. All your network. Now, I'm a single middle-aged woman in Chicago who felt like her whole life and ministry were being fulfilled. And part of my story was a story of this church. And so my identity was locked into this. And though, again, we speak a good language of, my identity is in the Lord. But really, most of us don't really see how little that's true until we lose the thing that we have our identity in.
Totally, Lina.
And so I leave and I think, and I'm convinced because again, I'm prayerful. I'm in the place I'm supposed to be. And I'm thinking as soon as I leave, like everyone's going to also see, like I'm one of the good people and I leave. So they're all going to see, like, this isn't like, exactly. And I thought maybe 6 months things will implode. And for 6 years, Aubrey, for 6 years, I became, the us versus them when a church implodes. There's a few years where things haven't crystallizes, and everyone who's in the church, they don't even mean to do it. Honestly, even some of my friends probably listen to this and would feel bad. Like I've thought about it, things that I've said. I don't even think you notice that you do it, but there's an us versus them when you leave the church. And you could, and there's then in that season, there's a lot of self-blaming. Like maybe I shouldn't have left. Maybe I thought it and all the stuff that goes on in your mind. But the biggest messiness that happened to me, which I also think is part of the baggage that people who go through this type of thing happens to, is that my relationship with the Lord suffered. And it's because all my life I was in this church world where church is like the pastor, the church, it was so high in our minds. And it should be. I don't think that's wrong per se.
Right.
But it became, I felt like God let me down for a long season. That's the best way I could say it. I really felt like God had really dropped the ball when it came to my story, because first the engagements, I never married the man that I really felt God wanted me to marry. I had the verse, the circle, the, claim it, believe it. And it wasn't like even a, claim it and stay, like it was really a belief in my soul that the Lord had. He was a good Christian guy. We were best friends for 10 years. Like I really felt like this was the plan.
This is who God had for you.
If I wait, the Lord will do it. All these things that you thought. And when it didn't happen, I already felt like, okay, fine. Like I got over that. But now all my dreams were in ministry, and like the Lord pulls the rug. And I knew that there was wrong in the church, and it wasn't like he wasn't putting it to right. So that even felt double whammy. Like now I feel bad, but also like God standing. So it also became with God, not just humanly, us versus them. It became with God, me against, like I felt like I was on like a really, like we all talk about being adopted as Christians, but I felt like I was actually adopted, right? So that's how it felt. And so 6 years later, I mean, of course I write in my book Fractured Faith about that story. And I think now I look back, and so I wrote a book about it, obviously, and eventually the pastor I wrote the book, it came out after it imploded fully. So the pastor was technically disqualified. Well, he was not technically, he was disqualified, from ministry eventually. Yeah. So the story's public. I mean, all the Chicago church stories, sadly, are public and well known at this point, and heartbreaking. And but I think I look back and I think a lot of what I felt, like, the deconstruction movement grew out of that era. And there's no question that I deconstructed in many, many, many ways. And some very good ways. I think this idea that the pastor, the church is in the place of Christ is idolatry. Even though the church is the body of Christ, that had to change.
Wow.
And I needed to be able to say, Lord, ministry is ministry. At the end of the day, that is not communion with you. And now, even it's funny, even when the book came, I even see in the last that was like 2000, I don't know, 16, 17, maybe. No, I guess it would have been the more like late, like towards the 20. The book came out maybe pre-COVID. But now I even feel the past 5 years, the Lord has done a lot of healing in my life. I don't know. It's just been good. But when you deconstruct, you either end up in disbelief or in stronger belief. And that's the road that the Lord has done in my life. And I'm very, very grateful for it.
We'll definitely put all of the book links in the show notes. I do want to talk to you about that, because deconstruction is, I don't even want to call it a buzzword. I think it's the accurate word for what's happening. Like you named it, like you didn't necessarily have the language 10 years ago. You've got some of the language now, and it's good to have language, because I think proper language helps us in our healing process. To be able to name things rightly helps us move forward in healing. But you're exactly right. I think the deconstruction journey, either you move away from Jesus, away from faith altogether, or there's like a good realignment that happens, like you're talking about, where the Lord is like, nope, that's an idol. Nope, we're going to change that. Nope, we're going to put me back on the throne. Can you talk to our listeners who maybe are in a deconstruction season? How did the Lord bring you back to that place of faith where you're like, look, you've let me down. Why are you standing by while this stuff is happening? Why have you removed these dreams from my life? Like how did God meet you there, I guess, is the question that I'm asking.
Well, first of all, it took an extremely, I think in hindsight, an extremely long time. Like I really, even now, I think honestly, like I was driving to church this weekend and I thought, this is the first season that I remember, this meaning in the last, since 2024 started, that I feel a sense of my old self and the good, like I really would say. So it's been almost like, I left the church 2013, so it's 11 years, but 2 years before that, all of the drama. I mean, so when I say a long time, almost over a decade.
It's a long time, Lina,
It's a really long time. And I know that not everyone is the same. Some people heal faster, but I also would contest that that's not true. Most people, I think, underestimate the length of time it takes to reconcile all of the emotional and mental and, all the ideologies that we have. It's not quick work.
Yeah.
And I think maybe there is some of that and I don't say this to discourage people, because that's all part of the process, but I think there's a part of us that wants a quick fix, and there isn't. There just isn't. There isn't. You have to live it. So you say, what happens when you have to live it? And how do you live it? Well, painfully. And so for me, part of my story, of course, I ended up going to therapy, which it's so interesting because I still see my therapist, and I was talking about that the other day. I don't necessarily feel like, well, most people would say you probably don't need therapy anymore, but it's become a relationship that's like, in some ways, like a church relationship for me.
Wow.
So, and I think more so as a person who is single, who travels a lot, cannot be like in one spot every single. So the old, like I think talking about church is different. So already we're fractured in the church, like, right? People forget the deconstruction conversation. Just church world has become very chaotic for the American Christian. And you can throw in COVID, and you can throw in our culture, and you can throw in the abuse that pastors have done. So many things. And so, and really for me, probably the biggest is practically speaking, between the Lebanon work that we do, between the speaking engagements that I do, between the medicine that I do, and between traveling, keeping up with my elderly mom. And now I'm spending the winter. How do you maintain? So in a perfect world, you could say, the church world we grew up in was that 3 times a week we went with the same people to the same place. So community. So now that's gone. So right. And on top of it, you throw in, you leave the church. So now your whole network is gone. So you have no small group. And so where do you maintain an open, authentic, truly authentic, not even like, because I think we all fake a small group community to a certain degree, not all, but there's always the one person who says everything, but no one has time to do therapy in small group because there's 10 of you, right? And so you end up being annoyed with the person who gives out everything because you're like, no, then you feel guilty because you leave and you haven't addressed that. So I think there's a place where I needed a healthy therapy, relationship where I could tease out the pain. And I'm also very verbal and very, obviously I'm a verbal processor. So I don't think many people could handle me. And I mean, when I say many people, I mean like my sister and my mom. There's like, and I recognize that now. Like they couldn't bear that burden. They had their own life and stuff. So, but I don't think realistically you need a therapist to get over church hurt or to get over deconstruction or to heal from painful situations. It helps, but it's expensive. And sometimes the blessing of someone like me writing a book is and I wrote, by the way, another book after that. Don't tell anyone you're reading this, which talks about shame and secrets. And a lot of that is also stuff that you wrestle with during the seasons of disappointment and where you're despairing with God. And you shouldn't be, but you are, and you're feeling it, and how you react to that, and a lot of the addictive, sinful behavior that happens in your life. And so I think I've, by God's grace, done that work so if you're like listening, you're like, well, therapy, like that's easy for you to say. You're a doctor, you can afford it. First of all, I think it's expensive. So read the book, right? I mean, it's like people have done the work for that reason, right? You don't have to be. And also the Lord has been healing people well before, therapy was there. So it's just that for me, that's been part of my story.
Hi, friend. One of the questions we get asked most frequently here at Nothing is Wasted is, how do I help my friend who has just experienced a trauma, tragedy, or major life transition? We know there are so many of you who listen to our podcast and who follow the work we do because you want to help those you love as they walk through a difficult season. We love the compassionate hearts of those within the Nothing is Wasted community and appreciate your desire to help bring healing and hope to the many and to the one, which is why I wanted to share with you a resource that we have called When Everything Changes, Navigating the Early Days of Loss, Trauma, and Tragedy. In this 4-session mini course, participants will hear from me, as well as Davey Blackburn, our founder, and also the podcast co-host, Aubrey Sampson. Aubrey is also the author of The Louder Song, a best-selling book on lament. I'll share with you practical ways to walk them through whatever valleys they found themselves in recently. We know our Pain to Purpose course is such a helpful and proven pathway for those who have had a little time to process their pain. But we wanted to also have something for those who are in the immediate aftermath of their lives changing forever. This is a great resource that you can purchase and share with your friend who has found themselves in a story very different from what they expected. In each session, they will get practical wisdom on what to expect in those early days, how to lament, and what support they need as they go through this marathon of healing. If you'd like to send this to a hurting friend, simply go to nothingiswasted.com/everythingchanges and select the course When Everything Changes gift option. We are so grateful for compassionate individuals like you who are willing to step into the pain of those they love and walk them through it. And we hope you'll find resources like this course and this podcast to be the tools you need to help those who are struggling when everything changes.
But why I break it down a little, because to me, therapy wasn't just about going, sitting on a couch and being like, here's my, it's been really now, it's transitioned into a healthy relationship of openness and authenticity. It's a Christian counselor. I see someone once asked, well, what kind of counselor is she? To me, it wouldn't have occurred to me not to see a Christian counselor. But you go back to like this question of deconstruction. So some of the practice, so everyone who deconstructs is listening to someone.
Yeah.
Right? Forget, every human is listening to someone. We all are.
Especially
I just
in this
read
day
John
and
Mark.
age. Yeah.
Yes, I read John Mark Comer's book, and he builds on a lot of what Dallas Willard and others who have written on spiritual formation talk. And he makes a really good point at the beginning of his book, which I believe is so true. He says, we're all being formed by something.
That's right.
And so the biggest critique of let's say, the people who consider themselves true deconstructionists of people like me, they would not call us true deconstructionists, because I did not stop believing the Bible to be the word of God. I think this is an important thing. And I think you can deconstruct. You have to believe something.
Right.
A lot of my ideas about the Bible had to change, but God's words, I believe God still exists. So I think it's unfair for someone to say, well, you didn't deconstruct because you still read the Bible. Well, of course I do. You're really reading something.
Yeah.
Who are you listening to? You know, the best-selling list author of, who won't even be dead in 20 years. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't, like, our life is so fleeting. Like, as a physician, like, you understand this is not long. I'm already 52 this year. Like, in April, I'll be 52. Like, life just goes by so quickly. And in emergency medicine, even more quickly. And so we're all listening to something. And so, but I couldn't hear clearly, right? There's years you go by. So one of the blessings for me, besides that, I went to a Christian therapist. And by the way, not the old, fundamentalist Christian therapist as I'd read these verses, read them, but someone who could really
a trained therapist. Yeah.
It was important because I knew the other side of it. Yeah. I knew the Bible and the verses. I'd spent my whole life. I talk a lot in my last book, Don't Tell Anyone, about the challenge of the formulas. We in the church have been really obsessed with formulas. If you read your Bible and you pray, everything will be well. Well, yes and no.
Yeah.
It's not that it won't be. It's just that it's not that, like, the devil quoted verses to Jesus in the time. It's like anyone can quote verses. Anybody, anyone. The religious leaders were experts. They were experts in quoting verses, and they missed Jesus. Jesus withdrew from them. And so I needed the Lord. I didn't need a set of Bible verses. Now you go, but the Bible verse is the word of God. Yes, I understand, which is why I believe I ended in belief, not in disbelief, because in the backdrop, I'm a creature of habit. And so I still showed up. No, sometimes kicking and screaming. That doesn't mean I was in church every single Sunday, but I went to church. And some of it was by God's grace, because I had nephews who lived 2 blocks from me. And it was unheard of for them to go to church and not take me with them. Wow. And so I would sit in the back with them. And they didn't even like church at that point. But it was like, we did it, your family.
This is what we do.
Blessings. Yes. And it was like, how? You can't. And they would come and wait in the car till I came out, as an example. So that's church. Right there, the people in your life and they knew what I was going through. They're not dumb, even as little kids they were back then, preteens and teens, because they left the church too. So they understood. We went 2-3 churches, so they understood the tension of that, and their faith is strong today. They're in college, graduate from college, and they are telling people about Jesus. People are giving their lives to Jesus, like they are unwavered in their. It's crazy, and why? But because we didn't try to hide our struggle. We've been a very open family. They understood, and in it. So, and I was teaching the Bible, and I was in the Word. I mean, I planned lessons, and so my heart wasn't to just be like, oh, I hate all this stuff. No, it was more like I just needed to connect with the Lord. That was the cry of my heart, and I felt for years because of this trauma. And by the way, going through the church hurt, which for one felt a lot more painful than breaking the engagement, but it also, I found that a lot of the conversation that I had to have with my therapist had to go back and unpack the stuff that I hadn't dealt with the personal life stuff that I just sort of said, okay, like I wanted the conclusions of, well, God is using them for good. Okay, now I'm a Bible teacher. Like, right? It was like, package it. Like, God, I didn't get married, but I'm single for the Lord. Look what
wrap
God
a little bow around it. It's all good.
Yes. It's like even this whole like hashtag nothing is wasted. I believe that to my core, but when you hear it as a Christianese, it can be a kick in the gut, because you're like, I know, but it certainly feels like my life is wasted.
It feels wasted. It hurts.
As an example, like, let me, I'm never gonna have kids. I'm in that age now where I can say that confidently. Like, I'm not gonna have kids. And I think it's sad. Is it wasted?
It is.
No, but it's sad. You have to mourn that. And I think it helps to mourn that in a place of empathy and compassion. And when I went through the church segment of several years, I didn't have that place. So therapy helped me showing up, the scriptures helped me. And eventually, honestly, there's no formula. The reality of it is Psalm 139 that says that when you make your bed in hell, there he is. He's right there with you. And the concept of a God who doesn't leave you or forsake you, the more dark it gets in your life and the more you have this awareness that God is still here, it's mind-boggling, because I don't think you see the level of how, like, you almost, I don't know, I think internally you always think, well, as long as I'm good, God will be for me. Like, you don't even say, like, I would teach the opposite of that, but I would live that.
Totally.
You see, like, I could go preach a great message on grace, salvation by grace, life by grace. But in my life, there was this aura of, as long as I'm good, God's going to be there. And when things weren't good, and it was like teasing out all these thoughts of maybe it's bad because I did something wrong. And of course, for me, I talk and don't tell anyone you're reading this about some of the secret patterns in my life, and nothing disqualifying per se, but things that I don't think are the healthy way. Well, no, I mean, sin stuff that in hindsight, I think I couldn't shake. Like, a lot of times when you can't shake a sin habit, you have to, well, just confess it. And so you would write it in your diary, and then you'd be like, why am I still doing it? Why do you keep going back? Those are the things that I had to learn, that I had to, and I think I'm for the first season of my life, I feel strong.
Wow, Lina.
It's taken a while, and I believe indeed that nothing is wasted, but you have to wait for it, and you have to wait for the Lord. And God has to do a lot in us in order to get us to the place where we relearn.
Yeah. It's like so much unlearning, untangling, and then relearning, and then that intimacy that comes on the other side of that.
That's it. And I can't, like you say, how do you achieve that? Again, think about marriage. I'm not married, but how you get married, you might feel intimate, then you might go your whole life living with someone. In fact, that's really a good example of probably sort of how I felt with God. Like, married couples who don't even sleep in the same room.
Totally.
Right?
They don't even talk to each other.
I hear, and people don't come tell you that. Like, it's like a hidden secret that most married couples don't sleep. And they'll have excuses. He wears a BiPAP, she snores, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, you become roommates. And in a sense, that's sort of how you can become with God. But who wants that? Like, I wanted more with God. And I think
you do. And God wants more.
100%. And I think we substitute all of the little ministry wins, even the good things, were the best thing. And you can now, for the first season, I could say, you can take it all, honestly. Like, even before I would say it, and not necessarily deep in my soul, I would have been like, oh, I'm losing out. And this is the first season where I think, honestly, if I get some of the things that I used to want, that's probably losing out, because I wouldn't have the time. I'm fighting now for time to develop more of the habits. Again, I critique the habits on one hand, because they can become so much a crutch and then a disappointment, because you're like, I'm reading my Bible, I'm praying, and I'm going to church, and nothing's happening. But you get over that wall. Then a lot of people have described the stages of faith, but if you persist, then one day, you go through a dark period, but the dark night of the soul. I mean, a lot is written about that, but you wake up one day with the understanding and the realization that as long as I have him, I'm good.
It's
and
so true.
Everything else starts to pale. And I still think I have a lot to learn in that, but the Lord is a faithful teacher.
That's right.
He won't let go of those who are his.
I think those seasons too, Lina, can almost, it can feel like you're reverting spiritually, or you're growing like immature or backwards, when in fact it's totally the opposite. It's such a strange paradox, but it is like, no, wait, no, I actually don't need anything but Jesus. I actually don't need anything but God. But it is strange to be like, is this okay? Am I, is this faith, or is it, and
all of
something
it
about that.
And even the concept, because you love the disciplines, but you also realize, like, even that, like, God still loves you, even if you forget to read your Bible, all the stuff, like, you're like, so I don't know, the Lord, I think about, I really believe that nothing will be wasted. We just don't always see, we don't even always live to that degree. I mean, I think I'm teaching on Stephen soon. I'm preparing a message for Stephen. But, but I mean, think about it. Like, Stephen, like, he never saw the fruit of his labor. It was the Apostle Paul. Think about all the world that has been affected by Paul. I mean, he knows now. I mean, he's in heaven. But when he was living it, it's like, He had no clue. It looked like utter failure. How many people, we know so many martyrs. I mean, the numbers of people who died for the gospel. I mean, we're doing, so besides this micro heart stuff, this is happening here in my heart. And I think, again, I think so actually I want to talk about the Lebanon connection in a second.
I do too. Yeah.
Well, because it was a fruit of that. So I'll come back to, but hold the thought for a second. But I think I think for the person who's, it doesn't have to be church hurt, but any kind of, I thought God would do this and it didn't happen. Because I think a lot of deconstruction is rooted in deep disappointment.
Absolutely.
Whether it's disappointment in a leader, it's disappointment in how your life's turned out. And I think, it's not like, I think, how do you, the hardest part of the story has been to try to tell people, well, what do you do? And I want to tell people always, you don't have to do much, but be careful of only, so I think a mistake would be what I see some who have left the faith and now say, who no longer hold to anything Christian, which I don't think is the end of their story either, because the Lord is faithful. But
that's right.
Now in this moment where they say that, I look at their stories and I think why do all, okay, fine, you don't believe the Bible anymore, but what, really, think about, it's not like you're all of a sudden some genius, none of us know.
Right.
I'm like, why all of a sudden do you think the guy on some TikTok is going to be I don't understand that.
He's got all the answers or whatever. Yeah.
And to walk through and say, well, I don't want any, there are no answers. Well, that's not truthful. There are answers. And you ask people who've gone through deep pain. I mean, I watched people like Johnny Erickson Tada, who did that Moxie episode with me with Our Daily Bread. And I think, how can you watch people like that and not know, there's more. More. And so,
there is something out there. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't just then be like, I'm distancing myself completely. Allow yourself to understand that you might have a wrong understanding of who God is. And you might not, you might even fight that. I would fight some of those, there's certain things that now I see as true. As an example, about 6 months ago, somebody it was probably my therapist. I also have a spiritual director. I like to surround myself with
that's good, smart. That's good, healthy leadership. Yes.
Yeah, right. But one of them had said to me something we could see this pattern of rest, moving towards rest. God was putting me on a sabbatical, and I was so resentful when somebody would say, "Oh, but maybe God wants you on a sabbatical," and I was like, I have so much energy. Stop using that word sabbatical. I think it's the least thing that God would want. And
God wants me going and doing.
I felt like God wanted to, headlock me into, and it felt offensive that they would say that, they were undermining what I was wired and created to do. And funnily, a year later, I just had AirPods made, and I'll show you, they're here. And you want to know how deeply I believe it, and I put the word rest on it.
Come on.
Yeah, I'm convinced that I have been given the gift of sabbatical, and they did not say anything. They could tell I fought, in both different conversations. I actually said it to my ministry team as well. I said, stop using that term. Stop it. We're not called sabbatical. And now I see what a gift it has been.
Wow, Lina.
I want sabbatical. I almost took a year, 2024 July to 2025 July, of saying no to every speaking engagement, but I felt like I was mean. I can be too legalistic about it.
Yeah. Okay. So even rest, you're too intense about it. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And you just gotta let it breathe. It's so going back. So the nothing is wasted. There's a work happening in you that eventually you will see. Indeed, nothing is wasted, but also practically. I said maybe earlier, I don't know if I said it here or what, but that every season of disappointment in my life and ministry has turned into a redirection. God somehow uses let's use the term loosely, failure to redirect my calling. Yep. I've seen that happen over and over again. So I actually ended up, had I gotten married back in my residency, I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing now in ministry. And it really has been, because that's when I left my residency to go do my fellowship. I finished pediatrics. I went to do training in ER, each is 3 years. I was devastated. I was really heartbroken. I'd lost the closest relationship in my life. And I was really hurt by God. But I was also in a season where I was still praying through, maybe if I pray harder, maybe if I keep hope, and eventually the guy got married to someone else. And so you realize, and even then, sometimes you tell yourself, oh, well, maybe they won't, she'll die. Or, I know it sounds dark, but you know what I mean? This is totally. The truth. You have every scenario in your head. And but then there's a point where you have to be okay, I guess that God doesn't.
This isn't my person. Okay.
So you have to accept it. And so in that season, the Lord, because I was now God moved me into a place of, sort of healing and stuff. Eventually that was the context of where I was asked to teach the Bible. And it opened up this whole nother world that I didn't even know I had the gift of Bible teaching. And I believe I think most people would say I do at this point, years later.
I've been doing it long enough.
But when the Lebanon thing, so I could never understand in my life in ministry, like even I would have conversations with friends who were in ministry, friend leaders, and we were always like, they were always everybody always wanted to try to fit in the doctor part with the Bible teaching part. When I wrote my first book, the publisher wanted me to think through and I'm like, I don't know, I'm just a Bible teacher. Like, I happen to be a doctor, but like, I don't know how to tie. I don't. And it was, it was when I left that church. Now I remember going to a tapas. I always laugh because I'm not a big fan of tapas. I mean, they're good as an appetizer, but I always feel they're very dissatisfied. Like, you're always hungry at the end. And so I don't know. But when we went to tapas and I was crying, and I cried like once publicly. I cry privately a lot. I watch America's Got Talent, and I'm always crying when I watch them. But publicly, I don't, except when I do. And if you watch Our Daily Bread special, I cry like a baby, which is hilarious. No, it's something. But it's interesting because that just came out a month ago. But I bottle things in like any good ER doctor does. And I remember the tears were coming down my face. And I was, even before now, this was back in 2013. Now 2024, I have a lot to cry about. So tears come easier.
That's a lot.
The Lord has healed me. I've been in therapy long enough to tell you, like, a good
now you're like, you can be vulnerable now.
I know. But back, which is also God's timing in that, even in doing that show, because I wouldn't have been as able to be as authentic. But back then, I remember my friend, she's one of my closest friends outside my family. And I could tell that I was a little surprised that the tears were flowing down. I thought, what am I going to do in my ministry now? Like, I was a women's Bible teacher. I wasn't a men's Bible teacher. I was in a church. I was a women's Bible teacher. And I had spent at that point 13 years of my life watering that and praying that and believing that. And back then we had Living with Power. I had nothing. It was just like my first book coming out. Like, so there wasn't even a real Living with Power. Right. But it was I felt like the nail on the coffin of my ministry, everything I had dreamed about. And even then I thought, what good was it to end the engagements? I'm not even like, what now? And it felt like I was free falling for 6 months. And in that 6 months, Moody Radio asked me to do the 1-minute show that I still have running on many stations, maybe 150, 180 stations in the United States, called Today's Single Christian. And so that was a fruit of it. And right around the time when they asked me to come and start recording those, and we recorded thousands of episodes, right out of that, I was asked to go to Jordan. And it was about late 2014. And I remember being so happy to be asked to do anything, because remember, now the whole church world had abandoned me, and there was still a few churches that had asked me to speak, and I was always nervous they're going to know I left the church, and they knew I left the church, and I thought they're going to cancel the speaking. But everything was so great that like nobody knew what was going on. And this church, who remains a faithful friend to me, I mean, like, and in hindsight, a lot of those fears were unfounded and ridiculous. Nobody was, a lot of it you create fears yourself. They're not even real fear, and people aren't walking around thinking about you anyway. But my friend who was the pastor's wife, they knew what they had actually been at my church years before, but now they were in Grand Rapids. And long and short, they asked me to go with their leadership team on a vision trip to see what was happening with Syrian refugees. And I was newly acquainted. About a year before, I was friends with Christine Kane, who and she was doing the work with sex trafficked people. And I always was intrigued, and I loved the work she was doing, but I never felt like I saw everybody wanted to do some kind of social work, but I just didn't feel like, I just didn't see where I tried to once think about organizing. I don't know, it just didn't feel, when God's opened the door, and this wasn't an open door, and I wanted it to be an open door because I really looked up to Christine Kane, and it just didn't work out to do anything there. And in that season so God like aligns all these things that you don't see happening. So I get asked to go to Jordan, and of course I'm dumbfounded by all of it. Like, it was back, I don't know, that was such a long time ago, but I mean, I know there's now the Gaza and Israel, the pictures are so, which I think is a completely different type of problem, but Lebanon was safe then, because the Syrian refugees, the war was up north, so they were coming to Lebanon as one of the big 3 countries. Jordan was the other. And so I went to Jordan, and I knew then, I was like, there's something here. I was Lebanese. I spoke the language. I'm a physician, and I'm called to ministry with no ministry now, because I'm no longer at the church, right?
Come on.
And so it was all God. And so we started doing our work. I went to Jordan. I met a team of 5 or 6 amazing people, 2 of which were a dentist and his wife, and we all fell in love with the refugees. But I think we were just waiting to see. It didn't feel like that there was space for us there. The UN needed to okay you at the time to go into the camps. So there were some obstacles, and I had a trip already planned to go to Lebanon. Like 2 months later, I went to Lebanon, and one thing led to one thing led to one thing, and long and short, I met a church who was literally like 15, over the mountains. You can see the mountains that the Syrians were walking over. And I actually went to Lebanon and got that's another story we don't have time for, but how I went to try to be a Bible teacher in Lebanon, like visiting, because I thought, well, they don't want me in the States. Maybe they want me in my home country. They were not interested, but I met a publisher, and she was funnily, I went to meet the Bible seminar thing, whatever, the professor who ran the Bible school, and he wasn't interested, but he pointed me to her. I asked him if he knew anyone who was doing publishing, and he pointed me to her. And my books were going to be published in Arabic. We had to raise money to do that. It was the whole thing. Yeah, but the beauty of it is that 6 months later, when we went to get the books, they were going to come out with the books. We had planned a conference. I'd never taught in Arabic. I was going to be teaching in Arabic. I was petrified.
Lina!
My language for faith has always been English. I got saved in an American pastor church, and so the concept of praying in Arabic was like I would write down it was stressful, but in that capacity, I met. My publisher worked with another lady. It was her brother who leads a huge ministry in Lebanon now, but at the time it was a local church. And anyway, we partnered with them, and we started going in 2015, 4 times a year to do medical mission trips. Now I had time. And that eventually, because of the financial need, and the time schedule constraints, I ended up leaving the ER to do telehealth, which was non-existent before 2014, 15.
Think about that.
There was because there was no phone until 2008. There was no apps. So the technology. So I started really early stages. This is pre-COVID. Nobody understood telehealth. People thought I was crazy when I said I would do telehealth. They thought I was giving up on a great medical career. And I was like, no, you don't understand. I could do this in a London Heathrow Airport on my way to Lebanon. So I knew I had hit the jackpot from a life perspective. I could see God's hand. Those are the little things where I could see, even though things were bad, I could see little evidences of God that were like above and beyond what I could ask or think. And so as much as I was kicking and screaming like a toddler, really, in hindsight, but you also see the goodness of God in it. And so I was sometimes afraid to say too much because I didn't want to get him mad, because I still didn't comprehend that God already knows. And so I started doing the work there. And just to bring that story to a close, 2 years ago, we started working towards establishing and living with power in Lebanon. And now we've got our papers, and Lebanon takes forever to do papers. We were within a year and a half, we have already finalized our papers. And guess who's our Lebanon director? My old publisher.
Stop it. Are you serious? Look at what God has done.
It's crazy what we're doing there. There's, right now we just rented this community center in the Baalbek. 2 weeks ago, where Israel bombed the area in Lebanon. It's like 15 minutes from where our center is. And but the work that's happening there, it's hard to talk about stuff on social media because a lot of it is dangerous work. But basically, they're regular. I'll tell you this: they're regular, times a week Bible studies. People coming to Christ from backgrounds of the organizations that you hear about on the news. And so, it's unbelievable. That's besides that we do a pharmacy. We run. They serve over 300 people free meds every week. We just have a ongoing work there. And then the Ukrainian war broke out 2 years ago. Again, all this because I went through this church hurt, and I never had time to step back from the moving vehicle, so to speak. I was so in my lane, working so hard for God that I missed the work that God had for me. I know it's crazy. I even now, I'm looking at this last season of the last 2 years, and some of the tensions we had. This also we had this vision to do this retreat house in Barrington, and I bought this 5-acre home, and within a year we launched it. Everything was looking so good, and then the neighbors freaked out because we're a business. They heard there was a retreat center. Long story, but point is, we ended up selling it with a profit by God's grace. Amen. We really did well, but we were disappointed, and it felt again like another season of what's happening now. And the Lord, the difference now is I'm starting to finally, I'm growing to an age where I'm finally learning, when you feel like you're in, everything that you've planned for has fallen apart. Pay attention, because God is starting something new. You don't have time for it when you're working so hard to accomplish what you think God wanted.
Yeah, you don't.
So the Lord this is the beauty of, like, nothing is indeed wasted, even from a perspective, but all the people who have been helped because of the work that our little ministry has done. And
Amazing.
whether it's in Ukraine, we hear the stories from Lina, our connection there, who's a single 50-year-old woman. She was just with us in January, and the stories there, and how much, like, how they live, and how our gifts are helping. And I think about the lives even that are being impacted in Lebanon, Syrians and Lebanese, and people from Hezbollah backgrounds, people that would never normally hear about the gospel. And we have an indoor.
Come on.
It's all God. And I think about the days in heaven that you're going to, I think about the people who support us with as little as $20, $10 a month, and just some bigger gifts. We need the gifts.
Yeah.
And I think about how God, and yet God has it just keeps going, like you always kind of look at this and you go, wow, I just think that person who gives their faithful check, like, you're going to be in heaven rejoicing over these baptisms. People are getting baptized.
It's amazing,
like
Lina.
Real fruit.
Come on.
Yeah. So I think, church, whatever. Like,
I mean, that's what I'm so moved by hearing your story. I mean, it could really bring you to tears. Like, and I understand it's about God's faithfulness in your life, but I also understand that you could have made a choice in the pain, actually a very reasonable choice in the pain and in the hurt, to just be like, I'm done with all of it. But you didn't. And I understand that was God's faithfulness drawing you near, but it's also like
both
that was,
right.
Yeah, like that was a watershed moment. And like you said, how'd you completely walked away from Jesus altogether? Wow, the fruit.
Hey friends, I'm so grateful that you are listening to this podcast and that you're connected to Nothing Is Wasted Ministries. But have you ever wondered the story behind Nothing Is Wasted? I mean, why do we call it Nothing Is Wasted? What does that mean? Where does that come from? Well, in 2015, I lost my wife, Amanda, and our unborn child in a home invasion. My life was completely changed from that moment on. And it was out of Amanda's life and legacy and my own journey towards healing that Nothing Is Wasted as a ministry came to be. There is so much more to the story, and so many ebbs and flows of grief, ups and downs in the trial, and the legal proceedings that followed for the men who murdered Amanda, and glimpses of grace and redemption through all of it. And I want you to get a glimpse into that. I would love for you to learn the entire story, the story that really started it all. It's Amanda's story, it's my story, and listen, it's your story, because in your story, you're going to see that as you read this, we're all a part of a bigger story. And that story reminds us that nothing is wasted. So I'd love to encourage you to get a copy of the book, Nothing Is Wasted, that tells you the full story at your favorite bookseller, whether it's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, doesn't matter. Or you can go to nothingiswastedbook.com and you can order your copy today. Again, nothingiswastedbook.com and pick up your copy of Nothing Is Wasted, the book.
That you would have missed.
Well,
and I know God does
I know.
Does, but
well,
wow.
I think the eye-opening, I know, I agree. I'm baffled by that. Like, you always think about that. You go, why do two people grow in the same home? And one is like, you watch families. One is utterly devoted to God and the other has, it is a mind-boggling. And I mean, of course you read, like, the passage of scripture where Jesus asked the disciples, like, who do people say that I am? And, one says John the Baptist, Elijah. And then he says, who do you say that I am? And in Matthew, Jesus, when they say, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, the answer of Jesus is, man has not, God has opened your eyes to it. And I think there's a level of all of this. Yeah, I don't understand all of it.
Yeah.
How do you keep a soft heart? And honestly, I think this kind of work is, I get a lot of emails from people, like, you get, a lot of people that, like, I've seen comments about the book or, on social, whatever. Like, I don't get a lot of hate like I've seen other faithful people do, but enough that you know what it feels like.
Yeah.
But I also get the emails from people who are utterly moved and whose lives are so, like, I've gotten enough emails of people who say, wow, your book, your story really has been a change in my life. And I think, you know what, it doesn't have to be 100,000 bestseller, in order to it's enough. It's enough, overcoming sin, of being seen. And so this work, you do a podcast and the Daily Bread thing, I ended up, like, I chuckle now because it's really, I cry so much in that, like, it's almost laughable. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't.
Who am I?
Well, I was mentally ready not to, because, like there's a lot of prep that goes in, and I was like,
Yeah.
and in it, you're reliving the pain. And yet even that, I got a really moving email the other day from someone who watched it, who is going through a deconstruction right now and asking questions that are hard. And I think you just, I think you just have to, like, it's like Jacob with wrestling God. You just have
Yep.
to stay in it. I
That's
don't know.
it.
He could have stuck with his family and not gone
Yep.
for that night and wrestled.
Yep.
The cost to him was a limp the rest of his life. But
Yeah.
man, everything changed in Jacob at that point. And
Mhm.
what's interesting about Jacob's life is you don't hear much about him after that point.
Yeah, you really don't.
You really don't. And so I think a lot of us think, oh, when I overcome this, it's going to be all flashy.
Then it'll
and
be,
really,
yeah.
but it's the opposite. He quiets down, and it's really, he goes to worship, and the only, like, it's then his kids are a mess, and then he goes and meets Joseph, and the Lord is, but that's it.
That's it.
That's,
Wow.
but he has a depth with God
Yeah.
that continues throughout his life.
Yeah. And that's the prize.
That's the prize.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Lina, thank you so much. I have just loved learning from you and hearing your story today. Where can our listeners find the book? Where can they connect with all the things that you're
Yeah.
up to?
My website, of course, livingwithpower.org. Everything is there. But also, I'm on Instagram. If you can spell my name, but no, it's at Lina AbuJamra, and that's probably the most active. We have a Facebook presence too, but those are the best places to find me.
Okay. All right. And again, we'll put all those notes in the show notes. Lina, thanks for being here with us today.
It's been a great conversation. Thanks for having me. And I'll be praying for the people listening that God would indeed soften our hearts and open our eyes to the reality of who He is.
Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, Lina. Well, hey, thanks so much for joining us for today's episode of the Nothing is Wasted podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and found it as encouraging and insightful as we did. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever it is you like to listen. We would love for you to rate and review as well. Your feedback actually helps us connect with listeners who need hope and healing, listeners just like you. And so we'd love to invite you to do that. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow the show notes for that, or you can just go on the YouTube app and search for us. We also love connecting with you on social media. We love engaging with you there and hearing your stories of how God is using these stories to encourage you. So you can follow the ministry at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. You can follow me at AbuJamra, and you can follow Davey at Davey Blackburn. Send us messages. We want to hear from you. And look, if you want to hear more about what we have here, the incredible resources that we have available to you at Nothing is Wasted to help you navigate whatever valley you're walking through, we want to invite you to visit our website, nothingiswasted.com. And if you're ready to start in your journey towards healing, go to nothingiswasted.com/start here for your next step. As always, we want to thank Sleeping at Last for providing all of the music on the podcast. We want to thank you, our Nothing is Wasted community. We want to thank our incredible guests. And remember, no matter what challenges you are walking through, nothing is wasted. Hey, thanks again for being here. We want to invite you to join us next time for an incredible conversation here on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. But before you go, check out a short clip from our next episode. Thanks for joining us, friends.
Engage in this ministry at church or don't engage. And I think so often his answer to me has been, stay close to me. Watch what I'm going to do. And in some ways that feels scary. But man, in a lot of ways that feels so relieving because I can trust him. And I mean, the story of all my life, whether it's Uganda or America, whether it's adopted kids or biological kids, whether it's missions or ministry in the local church here in Nashville, the testimony of all my life is, man, God is faithful to do what he says he's going to do and to be who he says he's going to be. And my personality and my bent is like really high achiever, really get it done, really like make the plan and execute it type person. And so that has always been a wrestle for me because I want a really clear instruction from God on what to do next. And I think so often his invitation to me has just been, stick close to me, and see what I'm up to.